The Unspoken Lullaby, Chapter 1. The Locked Journal. The scent of lilies, a cruel reminder of the funeral, still clung to Juliana's clothes. Her mother, Evelyn, had passed away quietly in her sleep, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than usual. Evelyn had always been a woman of few words, reserved, almost ethereal, keeping her emotions close to her chest. Juliana, now 50, had grown up accepting this, attributing it to her mother's quiet nature. She loved her fiercely, but always felt a subtle distance, a sense that there was a vast, unspoken landscape within Evelyn that remained forever hidden. Now, in the quiet aftermath of grief, Juliana was tasked with the solemn duty of clearing out her mother's modest house in Asheville, North Carolina. Each item she touched felt imbued with Evelyn's presence, a faint echo of her life. She carefully folded clothes, organized photo albums, and sorted through trinkets, each one a memory, a whisper of a life she thought she knew. Then, tucked away in the back of her mother's antique hope chest, beneath layers of delicate lace and pressed linens, Juliana found it. A small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. It had a tiny, intricate brass lock, and no key was immediately visible. Evelyn had loved writing, but Juliana had never known her to keep a personal diary. The secrecy felt both familiar and unsettling. A frantic search through her mother's jewelry box, through hidden compartments and old furniture, finally yielded a tiny, ornate key tucked into a velvet pouch Evelyn had used for rosary beads. With trembling fingers, Juliana inserted the key into the lock. A soft click echoed in the silent room. The journal opened. The first few pages were blank, as if waiting for a new beginning. Then, Juliana's breath caught in her throat. The handwriting was not her mother's elegant, flowing script. This was a bolder, more hurried hand. The ink faded, the words almost illegible in places. And the names were utterly foreign. August 12, 1958, Cottonwood Creek. The fear is a living thing, always at my heels. Thomas tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. Now what will become of us? Cottonwood Creek. Thomas. Names, places Juliana had never heard of. Her mother, Evelyn, had always said she grew up in a small town nearby, but never specified which one. She had always been vague about her childhood, dismissing questions with gentle smiles and evasive answers. As Juliana read on, the entries grew more frantic, more desperate. September 3rd, 1958. He's here. Graham, he found us. Lydia begged me to run, to take the children. But where? What do I do? My heart breaks for Sarah. And little James, so innocent. Graham, Lydia, Sarah, James. Children? Juliana's mind reeled. Children? Her mother had only ever spoken of her, Juliana, as her sole child. Who were these people? These children? The dates predated Juliana's own birth by more than a decade. The journal painted a picture of a woman living a life of terror, of a past completely alien to the quiet, serene Evelyn she had known. Each entry was a fragmented puzzle piece, hinting at a web of secrets. A profound sense of disorientation washed over Juliana. She had always believed she knew her mother, the quiet, loving woman who had raised her. But this journal revealed a stranger, a woman haunted by fear, making desperate choices in a world Juliana couldn't comprehend. The unspoken lullaby of her mother's life had suddenly, chillingly, become a desperate, silent scream. Chapter 2. Shadows of Cottonwood Creek. The journal became Juliana's obsession, a lifeline to a past she never knew existed. She devoured every word, each entry a revelation. A fresh wave of confusion and pain. Her mother, Evelyn, had meticulously changed her handwriting for the later entries, gradually morphing it into the familiar script Juliana knew, as if slowly shedding her old identity, erasing the woman who had lived in fear. The early pages of the journal were a harrowing chronicle of Evelyn's life in Cottonwood Creek, a small, impoverished community in the rural South, a place steeped in tradition and harsh realities. Evelyn had been an orphan, raised by a distant aunt, working tirelessly to survive. Thomas, the journal revealed, was her first love, a gentle soul, kind and ambitious. Their love story, tragically cut short, was interwoven with a darker thread. Graham. Graham was a menacing figure, a local thug, obsessed with Evelyn, who subjected her to a campaign of terror and harassment. He was violent, possessive, and dangerous. Evelyn described a specific incident, a brutal attack or a threat against her and Thomas that forced them to make an impossible choice. October 20th, 1958. He burned the fields. He told Thomas, "She's mine or you lose everything." Thomas said we had to disappear. But what about the children? Oh God, Sarah and James, they're so small. Children, Sarah and James. They appeared in the journal with heartbreaking frequency. Evelyn described their laughter, their tiny hands, the fierce love she felt for them. They were hers, her children, born years before she met Juliana's father, David. The revelation hit Juliana like a physical blow. She had siblings, older siblings, a family she never knew. The journal then detailed Evelyn's agonizing decision to protect Sarah and James from Gran, and from the bleak future they faced, with a mother who was constantly on the run. Evelyn made the ultimate sacrifice. She entrusted them to Lydia, a kind older woman, possibly a distant relative or a trusted friend, who promised to raise them as her own, far away from Cottonwood Creek, under new names. Evelyn, heartbroken, fled under the cloak of night, leaving behind her children, her identity, and her past. It was a desperate act of love, a sacrifice made in the face of unimaginable terror. November 5th, 1958. The bus pulled away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Sarah's face, James' tiny hand, they burned into my soul. I am no longer Evelyn Miller. I am a ghost, a whisper. I will find a new name, a new life, for their sake, for my survival. Evelyn Miller. That was her mother's true name, not Evelyn Reed. Juliana's mother had lived a lie, a protective shield built from pain and necessity. Juliana, fueled by a mixture of shock, grief, and a fierce determination to uncover the truth, searched through more of her mother's belongings. She found nothing that explicitly connected Evelyn Reed to Evelyn Miller. No old birth certificates, no photos with these children. Her mother had erased every trace, a testament to the depth of her fear. Then, tucked inside a worn Bible that Evelyn had always kept by her bedside, Juliana found a brittle, folded piece of paper. It was a faded bus ticket from Cottonwood Creek, South Carolina, dated November 5th, 1958. A small, almost invisible stamp on the back read, Carolina Greyhound Bus Lines. Cottonwood Creek, South Carolina, not North Carolina. The piece of the puzzle finally clicked. Her mother had fled from a different state, seeking anonymity across state lines. Juliana booked a flight to South Carolina, drawn by an irresistible pull towards the place where her mother's original life had been brutally severed. Cottonwood Creek was even smaller and more isolated than she imagined, a place where time seemed to have stood still. The general store, the dusty roads, the towering cotton fields, it all felt like a scene from a forgotten dream. She visited the local historical society, a small, sleepy office. The elderly director, a woman named Agnes, looked at her with a gentle, inquisitive gaze. "Evelyn Miller, you say? From 1958? Agnes mused, her brow furrowed. "That name, it rings a bell. There was a tragedy. A young woman who disappeared, and a man, Graham, a violent man who caused a lot of trouble back then. But no one ever knew what happened to Evelyn. She survived," Juliana whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And she was my mother." Agnes, her eyes widening, led Juliana to a dusty archive. There was a story, a local legend really, of a young woman who had 2 children. They say she vanished, and the children were quietly adopted out of town. Everyone thought she had either run away with another man or worse. But no one ever linked it to Graham. He was too powerful. Juliana felt a chill. The journal was real. Her mother had lived this nightmare. The unspoken lullaby had become a desperate cry for survival, a secret that had haunted her mother for a lifetime, now passed to Juliana to unravel. Chapter 3: The Echoes of a Hidden Life. The journey to Cottonwood Creek was like stepping into the pages of her mother's diary, a chillingly accurate recreation of a past steeped in poverty, fear, and profound sacrifice. Juliana felt a strange, almost visceral connection to the land, the dusty roads, the very air her young mother had breathed. Agnes, the Historical Society director, proved to be an invaluable resource. She shared local lore, old newspaper clippings, and even some hushed whispers that had circulated for decades about Evelyn Miller. It was a story of a beautiful, resilient young woman, ostracized by circumstance. Perhaps she was an orphan, or her family had a reputation, who fell in love with Thomas, a good man, but one who eventually disappeared or was forced out of town by Graham. The consensus was that Evelyn had been unsuitable for a normal life, a convenient lie to cover a deeper, darker truth. The names in the diary now took on flesh and blood. Graham, the notorious troublemaker, was known for his violent temper and his relentless pursuit of Evelyn. He was also connected to a powerful, corrupt family in the region, which explained why his misdeeds often went unpunished. Thomas, Evelyn's love, had indeed vanished. Some said he'd gone north for work. Others whispered he'd been run out of town by Graham's thugs. The most agonizing part of the investigation centered on Sarah and James. Agnes found a subtle reference in a local church's baptismal records from 1956 and 1957. A Sarah Miller and a James Miller were baptized, with their mother listed simply as Evelyn. Below, a note in smaller script indicated that custody transferred in late 1958, a euphemism for adoption. The records were sealed, protected by decades of privacy laws. Juliana's heart ached. Her mother hadn't just had children. She had birthed them, loved them, and then, in an unimaginable act of self-sacrifice, had given them away to protect them. The entries about their innocence, their tiny hands, her fierce love for them, now resonated with devastating clarity. November 4th, 1958. Lydia promises she will take them far away, to a place where Graham cannot reach. They will have a new name, a new life, a life without fear. My heart is being ripped from my chest, piece by agonizing piece, but it is for them, always for them. Lydia. Agnes remembered a kind elderly woman named Lydia Mayhew, a distant relative of the Millers, who had suddenly moved away from Cottonwood Creek in late 1958, taking two young orphaned cousins with her to a small town in Georgia. She was known for her kindness and discretion. Lydia Mayhew was the woman who had saved Sarah and James. Juliana felt a desperate need to find Lydia, or her descendants. The journal's final cryptic clues about Lydia's new home were vague, but Agnes suggested looking through old church records and property deeds. It was a long shot. Back in Evelyn's diary, Juliana found a small, almost invisible pocket sewn into the inside cover, a testament to her mother's meticulous secrecy. Inside, a faded, creased photograph. It showed a young Evelyn, undeniably the woman from the early journal entries, holding two small children, a little girl with bright eyes and a tiny boy with a serious expression. Their faces were clear, sweet, and undeniably Evelyn's children. Underneath, in Evelyn's original hurried script, was written, "My Sarah, my James, forever in my heart." Juliana broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The tangible proof of her siblings, their innocence, their tender faces, brought a wave of grief and fierce protectiveness. Her mother had lived a lie, a silent scream for these children, all her life. The unspoken lullaby had become an unbearable, lifelong burden. Juliana then found a small, unsent letter, tucked deep within the journal's pages. It was addressed to "My dearest Juliana," written in Evelyn's familiar, later handwriting. "My darling girl, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found my secret. Forgive me for the silence. It was not out of a lack of love for you, my precious daughter. It was to protect you, to protect us all. The past was a dark place, but know this, every day I lived, I carried a part of them in my heart, and a part of you. You were my second chance, my redemption. Now perhaps you can find them, bring them home, finish what I could not." The letter was a final plea, a dying wish. Her mother had left this trail for her, trusting Juliana to understand, to forgive, and to complete the family she had been forced to abandon. The path was clear, but the journey would be arduous, fraught with emotional minefields. Juliana had to find Sarah and James. Chapter 4, The Path to Redemption. Juliana spent weeks meticulously tracing Lydia Mayhew's movements. With Agnes's help from the Historical Society, she discovered that Lydia had moved to a small town in Georgia in late 1958, as predicted by the journal. She found old property records, then census data. Lydia Mayhew had died in the early 1990s, but she had indeed raised two children, Sarah and James Mayhew. They had taken Lydia's surname. Juliana's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Her siblings were real. They had lived lives, grown up, perhaps had families of their own. She was about to step into a century-old secret, a past that belonged not just to her mother, but to them. Using modern genealogical databases and public records, Olivia, still her steadfast companion in this quest, managed to locate Sarah Mayhew, now Sarah Jenkins, living in a quiet suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. James Mayhew, now James Clark, lived in Florida. Both were in their late 60s, mere years older than Juliana's actual age. The decision of how to approach them was agonizing. Juliana drafted countless letters, discarded them, then wrote more. How do you tell someone, a stranger, that their mother, who they thought was Lydia, was actually someone else who had given them up under duress? How do you reveal such a monumental, painful truth? She finally decided on a heartfelt, carefully worded letter, enclosing copies of Evelyn's diary entries about Sarah and James, the old photograph of young Evelyn with her children, and her mother's final letter to Juliana. It was all the proof she had and all the explanation. She sent the letters, praying for understanding, for connection, for forgiveness. The weight was unbearable. Days stretched into weeks. Then a call, an unfamiliar number. "Is this Juliana Reed?" A woman's voice, hesitant, but with a clear, steady timbre. "Yes," Juliana whispered, her heart racing. "This is Sarah Jenkins. I received your letter. I don't know what to say." Her voice broke. Are you serious? Is this real?" Juliana poured out the story, carefully, compassionately, detailing Evelyn's fear, Graham's threats, Lydia's courage, and her mother's lifelong burden of guilt and sorrow. Sarah listened, quietly at first, then with choked sobs. "My mother always said Lydia was always vague about our birth parents," Sarah confessed, her voice trembling. "She said they were good people, but couldn't care for us. She gave us a good life, a loving home, but I always felt a piece of me was missing, a question mark." James, her brother, was also on the call, listening in silent disbelief. He was more guarded, more skeptical, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photograph of their biological mother, Evelyn, holding them as babies, was irrefutable. The first meeting was in Atlanta, at a neutral location. Juliana walked into a small coffee shop, her heart thumping. Two people sat at a table, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and hope. A woman with kind eyes, a strong jawline that Juliana recognized as her mother's, and a man with a quiet demeanor, his gaze surprisingly similar to Evelyn's. Sarah and James, her siblings. The meeting was emotional, awkward, and profoundly healing. They shared stories, piecing together the fragmented narrative of their intertwined lives. Sarah and James spoke of their loving upbringing with Lydia, their questions about their origins, their quiet yearning for answers. Juliana shared stories of their mother, Evelyn, the woman she knew, the reserved, kind woman who had silently carried a profound sorrow for half a century. "She always seemed to be searching for something," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "Now I know what it was. Us." James, initially guarded, found his voice. "Lydia told us our birth mother loved us fiercely, and that she made a great sacrifice. But she never told us why, never gave us a name. To know it was this level of terror and love, it's a lot to take in." Juliana explained Evelyn's hidden life, her fear of Graham, her reason for changing her identity. She revealed that Evelyn had married Juliana's father, David, and built a new, safe life, but never truly escaped the shadows of her past. She had loved Juliana fiercely, but always carried the unspoken lullaby of her first children in her heart. The meeting wasn't an instant, perfect family reunion. Decades of separate lives, of different upbringings, could not be erased, but it was a beginning, a profound, sacred beginning. They were family, a family reunited by a mother's dying wish, by a locked journal, and by the relentless pursuit of truth. The unspoken lullaby, once a secret, now began to sing a new, complex, and deeply moving symphony of love, loss, and redemption. Chapter 5: The Unraveling Threads of Fear. The reunion with Sarah and James, her newly found siblings, was a kaleidoscope of emotions for Juliana. Joy, sorrow, guilt, and a profound sense of completeness she hadn't known she lacked. They spent days together, talking, sharing stories, poring over Evelyn's journal, piecing together the fractured narrative of their extraordinary mother. Sarah and James, who had been raised by Lydia, had always felt a subtle disconnect, a void that couldn't be explained. They had loving adoptive parents, but the question of their origins had always lingered. Evelyn's diary and Juliana's detailed account of her mother's life in fear finally provided the answers they had unknowingly sought their entire lives. "Lydia was an angel," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "She gave us everything, but she also carried a heavy burden, keeping Mom's secret. She used to look at us sometimes with such a deep sadness. Now I understand." James, typically more reserved, shared his own struggles with feeling unrooted. "I always wondered why I felt so different, like I didn't quite belong. It's not a comfortable feeling, to know it was because of a man like Graham, and that our birth mother sacrificed everything to save us. It's a lot to process." The shadow of Graham, the antagonist from the diary, still loomed large. His name evoked a visceral reaction from Sarah and James, even though they had never known him. The terror their mother had endured, the reason for her lifelong silence and hidden identity, was palpable. Juliana felt a fierce protectiveness for her mother, understanding now the full scope of her suffering. With the help of Sarah, who had a strong background in legal research, they began to investigate Graham. They discovered he had been a notorious figure in the region, involved in various criminal activities, and protected by his powerful, corrupt family. He had died in the early 1980s, but his legacy of fear remained. The knowledge that he was gone brought a small measure of relief, but the scars he left were deep. Juliana learned that her mother Evelyn had indeed married Juliana's father, David, years after fleeing Cottonwood Creek. Evelyn had loved David deeply, but had never confided her past to him. The journal indicated a profound fear that if David knew, he would either reject her or, worse, be put in danger by Graham's lingering influence. She had chosen silence as a shield, a constant, unspoken sacrifice. David had passed away a few years before Evelyn, never knowing the full truth about his wife's hidden life. Juliana felt a pang of sorrow for her father, for the truth he never knew. Yet, she understood Evelyn's desperate need for safety and a fresh start. Evelyn's profound love for Juliana was evident in every aspect of her upbringing, a second chance at motherhood, a chance to pour all her suppressed maternal love into her youngest child. The siblings discovered they shared not just a mother, but subtle mannerisms, a dry sense of humor, and even a shared love for certain obscure books and music that Evelyn had introduced to Juliana. These small, shared quirks were like finding hidden treasures, tangible threads connecting them across the years. They spent countless hours looking at the old photograph of Evelyn with baby Sarah and toddler James. Sarah saw her own baby face. James recognized his quiet gaze. They saw their mother, young and vibrant, holding them with such fierce love. It was a powerful, poignant connection to a past they had been denied. Juliana decided to create a memorial for her mother, not just in Asheville, but in Cottonwood Creek, the place where her true life began and ended. She worked with Agnes at the Historical Society to establish a small, quiet tribute to Evelyn Miller, acknowledging her struggle, her sacrifice, and her courage. It was a place where Sarah and James could visit, a tangible link to their biological mother and a recognition of the hidden chapter of their shared history. The unspoken lullaby had finally found its melody, not in a perfect harmony, but in a complex, beautiful symphony of lives interwoven by fate, sacrifice, and the enduring power of family. Juliana had not just found her mother's secret, she had found her own expanded family, a deeper understanding of love, and a profound respect for the woman who had lived two lives, both defined by an extraordinary, enduring love for her children. The journey of unraveling her mother's secret had transformed Juliana's own life, filling the void she had always felt with the profound richness of a rediscovered past. Chapter 6: Echoes of Forgiveness. The process of weaving the threads of their fragmented family continued. Juliana, Sarah, and James found themselves in a unique position, navigating a relationship that was both entirely new and deeply ancient. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared genetic resonance that transcended the decades of separation. Juliana dedicated herself to understanding the full scope of her mother's silent suffering. She read and reread the journal, noting the subtle shifts in handwriting, the gradual disappearance of the desperate tone as Evelyn built her new life as Evelyn Reed. It was a testament to her mother's incredible strength and resilience, a quiet triumph over a terrifying past. Sarah and James, with Juliana's help, began to process their own complex emotions. There was grief for the childhood they never knew with their biological mother, and a sense of betrayal, however unintentional, that their origins had been concealed. But overriding these feelings was a profound admiration for Evelyn's sacrifice. They understood that her decision to give them up was an act of ultimate love, born of desperation and a fierce desire for their safety. "She carried us in her heart every single day," Sarah often said, holding the old photograph of young Evelyn with them as babies. "She never forgot us. That's what matters." James, always the more pragmatic, started to find a sense of peace. He channeled his newfound understanding into a desire to help others affected by similar hidden family histories. He volunteered for organizations that helped adopted children connect with their biological families, sharing his own story as a testament to the complexities and profound rewards of such reunions. They also discovered a small, almost forgotten gravestone in an old, neglected cemetery in Cottonwood Creek. It bore the name Thomas Miller, dated 1959. Evelyn's journal had hinted at Thomas's tragic fate, but never explicitly stated it. It was likely he had been killed by Graham or had died trying to escape him. Another victim in the web of violence that had driven Evelyn away. Juliana, Sarah, and James tended to the neglected grave, placing fresh flowers, a silent acknowledgement of the young man who had loved their mother so fiercely and whose memory had been erased by fear. It was a small, private ceremony, a moment of collective grief and quiet remembrance. The connection to Graham, the orchestrator of Evelyn's torment, brought a lingering shadow. While he was long dead, the knowledge of his cruelty and the power he wielded still sent shivers down their spines. Juliana, Sarah, and James quietly agreed to research his family's history to ensure that no one else would fall victim to such a legacy of abuse and control. They contributed to local historical records, ensuring that the true story of Evelyn Miller and Daniel was not forgotten or distorted. Juliana visited her mother's grave in Asheville regularly. She would sit for hours, talking to Evelyn, telling her about Sarah and James, about their lives, their children, their understanding, and their gratitude. She felt a profound connection, a sense of completion, as if her mother's spirit was finally at peace, knowing her children were reunited. The unspoken lullaby, once a haunting melody of sacrifice and sorrow, had finally found its resolution. It was a symphony of lives intertwined, of past pains healed, and of a future built on truth and love. Juliana's relationship with her own father, David, took on a new depth as she reflected on the secrets her mother had kept. She realized that while silence had been Evelyn's shield, it also represented an immense burden. She promised herself that she would live a life of transparency, cherishing every moment and every truth. The journey of unraveling her mother's secret had transformed Juliana in ways she could never have imagined. She was no longer just the daughter mourning her mother. She was the keeper of a sacred trust, the weaver of a fragmented family tapestry, and the embodiment of a love that defied silence, fear, and the passage of time. She understood now that true strength lay not just in enduring, but in revealing, in healing, and in embracing the complex, beautiful entirety of one's history. The names from the diary, once strangers, were now the beating heart of her extended family, a living testament to the enduring power of a mother's love, echoing through generations. Chapter 7: The Unveiled Legacy. As the years passed, the family that Evelyn had been forced to leave behind flourished under Juliana's unwavering dedication. Sarah and James, now fully integrated into Juliana's life, embraced their newfound heritage with a quiet joy. Their children and grandchildren learned of their grandmother Evelyn, not as a distant, unknown figure, but as a courageous woman who made unimaginable sacrifices out of boundless love. The story of Evelyn Miller became a powerful legacy, a testament to resilience and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Juliana, once driven by a need to uncover secrets, found her purpose in sharing the story of Evelyn and the journey of their reunion. She collaborated with a local author to write a book about her mother's life, detailing the harsh realities of the past, the trauma of Graham's persecution, the profound love for Thomas and her first children, and the impossible choice that led her to live a hidden life. The book, titled The Unspoken Lullaby, became a beacon of hope for others, a raw and honest portrayal of the lengths a mother would go to protect her children. The success of the book led to public speaking engagements where Juliana shared Evelyn's story, advocating for victims of domestic violence and for greater understanding of the long-term psychological impact of trauma. She spoke about the importance of truth, the complexities of forgiveness, and the enduring power of family, even when fragmented by time and circumstance. Sarah and James often joined her, sharing their own perspectives on being the children of a hidden past and the beauty of reunion. The old Mayhew farm in Georgia, where Lydia had raised Sarah and James, became a cherished place of remembrance. The siblings renovated the old farmhouse, preserving its historical integrity and turning it into a family retreat. It was a place where all branches of their reunited family could gather to share stories, create new memories, and honor the legacy of Lydia, the adoptive mother who had given them a safe and loving home. Juliana established a small foundation in Evelyn's name, dedicated to supporting young mothers in vulnerable situations, helping them find safe havens and providing resources to escape dangerous circumstances. It was a way to honor her mother's silent suffering, to ensure that no other woman would have to make the agonizing choices Evelyn had made. Her own grief for her father, David, also found a quiet resolution. She understood that while he never knew the full truth of Evelyn's past, their love was real, and his presence had provided Evelyn with the stability and peace she so desperately needed after her tumultuous youth. She realized that Evelyn's secret was not a betrayal of David, but a profound act of self-preservation that allowed her to find love and happiness in a new, safe life. The names from the diary, Thomas, Lydia, Graham, Sarah, James, were no longer strangers or frightening shadows. They were integral parts of a complex, beautiful tapestry. Thomas, the lost love, whose memory fueled Evelyn's enduring pain and fierce determination. Lydia, the selfless guardian, who had raised her siblings with love and courage. Graham, the dark force, whose cruelty had irrevocably shaped their lives, but whose power had ultimately been overcome by love and resilience. And Sarah and James, the beloved children, whose existence had been a lifelong secret, now the joyful foundation of a reunited family. Juliana often visited the small memorial in Cottonwood Creek, the place where Evelyn Miller's story had begun. She would sit there, holding the faded photograph of her young mother with her baby siblings, and whisper words of love and gratitude. She felt not sorrow, but a profound sense of peace. Her mother had lived a life of extraordinary courage, carrying the weight of an unspoken lullaby in her heart, hoping that one day her children would find their way back to each other. The journey had been long, painful, and utterly transformative. Juliana had lost a mother, but found a legacy. She had uncovered a secret, but found a family. The quiet, reserved woman she knew as Evelyn Reed was, in truth, a warrior, a survivor, a testament to the enduring power of maternal love. And in unraveling her mother's silent past, Juliana had not only healed old wounds, but had discovered a depth of connection and purpose within herself that resonated with the very rhythm of life. The unspoken lullaby had finally sung its triumphant, bittersweet song, a melody of enduring love that echoed through generations.